Well, good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to welcome all of you to the IISS and to this fifth dialogue between the IISS and the Ministry of External Affairs of India. I'm Alex Nichol. I'm Director of Editorial here at the Institute, and I'd like to extend a particular welcome to the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Ranjan Mathai, and to his colleagues from the MEA. These dialogues are held alternately in Delhi and here at Arundel House, and they have been very productive over the years, and I'm sure today's will be no exception. We're really pleased that in addition to Mr. Mathai, senior MEA officials, including the High Commissioner, will be speaking in today's other sessions. And we're also delighted that the newly appointed UK Foreign Office Minister with a responsibility for India, Hugo Swire, will later give his first remarks on bilateral relations. Now, speaking as someone who's had a keen interest in India during my career, I would note that relations between India and Britain have been marked by periods of intense activity to further links that are of mutual interest, especially in the field of business and investment, but of course in other areas too. And some members of the present UK government do have a keen interest in expanding links again. There's actually always been tremendous pent-up demand to explore new avenues of investment, as has been shown, for example, at times when Indian governments have carried out new rounds of economic reform and liberalisation. But there are also other areas, important areas of mutual interest, and today's sessions will pay attention to some of them, with a discussion of regional issues raised by Afghanistan and then of developments in the Arab world. These are both topics on which the IISS, as you'd expect, has done a tremendous amount of work, and on which India, as a rising and regional and global power, would also have a very important perspective. So, to set the outlines of India's perspective, it's my great pleasure now to invite the Foreign Secretary to deliver the keynote address of this fifth dialogue. Mr. Mathai rose to the head of the Foreign Service just over a year ago after serving as ambassador to France for the previous 4 years, and prior to that, as many of you know, he was Deputy High Commissioner here in London. After he's spoken, I'll invite questions and comments on his remarks. Foreign Secretary, welcome to the IISS. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be here for this fifth edition of our foreign policy dialogue with the International Institute for Strategic Studies. I've been to this institute many times before, as Mr. Nichols said, in my past avatar as the DHC in London. And I'm happy to see that Asia remains a key priority of your focus, and that the IISS continues to influence international discourse on strategic issues relating to the rise of Asia. Today's one-day dialogue, as you've just heard, will consider three subjects: Afghanistan, its neighborhood towards 2015 and beyond, the emerging Arab developments and their implications, and can India-UK strategic relations be built further? The first two are themes in every discussion of broader trends in the globe, and they are subjects of vital importance to us as they take place in our vicinity, if not in our immediate neighborhood. The third is also of special relevance to our outlook and our ability to handle the changes which are taking place at the international level. Before touching on these themes, I must re-emphasize that India's approach to planning and articulating its foreign policy remains what it has been, and to which I think the previous foreign secretaries have alluded while speaking from this floor. And that is that foreign policy is an enabler in the transformation of India. India is increasingly plugged into a globalized world, and events worldwide will affect our future. We need a peaceful periphery and a global environment which fosters constructive dialogue and cooperation around the world. In areas of tension, We support the development of suitable architecture for discussion and the maintenance of stability. We are aware today that almost half our GDP is now linked in one way or the other to foreign trade, up from only 20% of a much lower GDP in the 1990s. Foreign investment and technology continue to be significant inputs for India's growth. We are a country poorly endowed with natural resources relative to our share of the world's population, and we depend on energy and critical raw materials from abroad. Global communications, models, and best practices influence the thinking of our people. How the world grows and develops and how our foreign policy navigates the shoals ahead and finds the appropriate channels for safe and rapid travel is therefore a matter of vital importance for India. Since this foreign policy dialogue began in 2007, the world has come through a major financial crisis which almost turned into a generalized economic crisis. Measures taken through the institutional structure of the G20 by regional groupings and by individual countries have helped us stave off anything like the Great Depression of the 30s. But we continue to function in a difficult environment for growth, with uncertainties in markets, worries about the Eurozone, and the overhang of fiscal difficulties in the US. Dealing with the slowdown in major economies at a time when there is increasing preoccupation with domestic policies and priorities has made the task harder. Policy attention continues to focus on national level analyses, even though the processes of globalization and economic interdependence have been pushing in another direction. These processes are also bringing in new subjects into the ambit of what was traditionally not always included in foreign policy management. As our Prime Minister remarked in a recent address to Indian ambassadors from around the world, and I quote, "There are also challenges thrown up by globalization, which has led to entirely new paradigms and discourses on issues ranging from the environment and sustainable development to international terrorism, piracy, and crime. 2 decades ago, the internet was regarded as a great enabler. Today, cyberspace is one of the most worrisome sources of threat to our national security." Unquote. We have also seen an increasing polarization over developments in various parts of the world and new elements of discord in a number of sensitive spots. Some of these are in what might be described as our extended neighborhood in the Gulf and Southeast Asia. These weigh on us, and we have sought to use our influence to support dialogue and reconciliation and negotiations for practical outcomes which meet the concerns of all parties. Actual progress in some cases has been slow and fitful. It is therefore against a somewhat somber background that we take up the issues before us and which are also at the head of the international agenda. Now, let me look at Afghanistan and its neighborhood to 2015 and beyond. Afghanistan is passing through a critical phase as it transitions towards greater responsibility for its own security and governance, and as NATO and ISAF forces move from a combat role to an advise, train, and assist role. Success or failure of this transition process will impact security and stability for many years to come, not just in Afghanistan, but also in Afghanistan's immediate neighborhood, particularly in Central Asia and South Asia. For many of us who are Afghanistan's immediate neighbors, we have neither the luxury of a withdrawal or a drawdown from the situation that prevails in that country today. Against the backdrop of this ongoing transition taking place in Afghanistan, the continued support of the international community for that country remains vital. We have all announced our commitments of support at international fora like the Bonn and the Tokyo conferences, and at various quadrilateral, trilateral, and bilateral fora that we have been participating in. What is now essential is that we make good on these commitments and that actual technical and financial assistance begins to arrive on the ground in Afghanistan. we need to move from rhetoric to actual implementation. For far too long, the tragedy in Afghanistan has been that the international community sees the country as a zone of conflict, competition, or to develop some notion of strategic depth. These zero-sum games that have historically bedeviled the situation must come to an end. India's vision is of an Afghanistan that will develop and leverage its resources for a better future, which will play the role of a transport and trading hub linking Central Asia with South Asia and beyond, and through which will flow trade, investment, energy, and people, bringing benefits not just to Afghanistan but also to the wider region. This was the idea underlying the Delhi Investment Conference on Afghanistan held in June this year. This is also the idea underlying most of India's aid programs in Afghanistan that focus on infrastructure and capacity building. The continuing threat of terrorism, the safe havens across the border, and menacing narcotics trade remain the most immediate challenges facing Afghanistan. The role of Afghanistan's neighbours in combating these pernicious evils assumes great importance. In a number of conferences, but particularly, as I mentioned, in Istanbul, Bonn, and Tokyo, the international community reaffirmed its commitment also to stay the course in Afghanistan and continue support for stabilization and developmental efforts. In Chicago in May 2012, the NATO also underlined that in the post-2014 era, Afghanistan would not be left without support. Peace and stability within Afghanistan affects our entire region, and we all have a stake in the success of the Afghan government and its partners in ISAF. We believe that reintegration must be based on the approach which has been endorsed by the international community in the international conclaves, namely that the political process should be Afghan-led and that the red lines must be adhered to. We must preserve the gains of the last 10 years. We have to take forward the training and equipping of the Afghan National Security Forces. Of course, Afghanistan will need to take further steps to reassure its partners about safety and proper management of the security training program. We are cognizant of the serious stresses caused by the attacks on foreign security personnel. India's assistance program is now estimated to involve a commitment of about $2 billion. It includes a number of large projects like the new Parliament building, the Salma Dam, and so on. There are also medium-sized projects and many programs of assistance for human resource development which are spread out throughout the country and where we will continue to provide assistance through our embassy in Kabul and our consulates in the provinces. Our assistance program is aimed at development partnership with the strategic objective of helping Afghanistan emerge as a self-reliant nation and, as I said, one which can play its part in the SAARC region and as a link between Central Asia and South Asia. We just say a few words about why we took the initiative to organize the Delhi Investment Summit. We did so to underline that Afghanistan represents an opportunity for the entire region and for international partners in the period 2015 and beyond. Afghanistan's mineral resources and its potential for hydrocarbons could be a game changer in the way we look at the prospects of collaboration rather than competition in that country. The work which has already been done to take forward the TAPI, that is the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, provide an opening for all of us in the region to take a re-look at the scope for intensified regional cooperation. This can be done under any name, whether the new Silk Route, as the Americans call it, or simply Central Asia, South Asia cooperation. If this vision of an interconnected region investing in prosperity rather than in futile great games is to become a reality, Afghanistan's neighbors have to be stakeholders. We ourselves are committed to supporting an architecture of regional cooperation and to engage on an Afghan policy founded on equal cooperation with all partners. During academic dialogues, including some in India, there have been references to a policy of positive non-alignment which could provide a support for the kind of framework we have in mind. I'll go over now to the emerging Arab developments and implications in that part of the world. The Arab Spring is historically unprecedented and has already brought in phenomenal changes and has altered the character of regional politics. While some countries have experienced the spring and are in the phase of transition, such as Tunisia, Egypt, and Yemen, others, such as Syria, are experiencing a winter of discord. We are engaging with the new leadership in Tunisia, now in Libya, and in Egypt, and have conveyed our readiness to enhance our cooperation with those countries. This region, which is part of India's extended neighborhood, is of vital and strategic importance to us. The wider region is home to more than 6 million Indians, many of whom have been there for generations and who contribute more than $35 billion in remittances to our country. Our economic and commercial engagement with the countries of this region is valued at more than $150 billion a year. It is a source for more than 65% of our oil and gas requirements, and it is critical for our energy security. The region is also a major source of phosphatic and other fertilizers and a significant factor in food security. Continued peace and stability in the region is therefore of immense interest to India. Our policy on the Arab Spring and towards countries in the what we call West Asia and North Africa region and the Gulf, and our posture in the Security Council have been guided by our long-standing ties with the region and our desire not to interfere in the internal affairs of states and being non-prescriptive. We have, however, called for restraint in the use of coercive measures against people who should be permitted to freely articulate their aspirations. We believe that societies cannot be reordered from outside through military force, and that people in all countries have the right to choose their own destiny and decide their own future. India has, as I said, welcomed the democratic transitions in the Arab world and has been willing to share its experience in areas such as electoral management and practice. We are also of the view that sustainable change must take account of diversity and the quest for freedom, for equality and identity. An inclusive approach is essential for dealing with the realities of multicultural societies and regional specificities. It should also be clear that democracy is for the long term, that change is the only constant in politics as in life. Constitutional structures, and particularly political practices, should therefore take account of the possibility of change, of rulers finding themselves in opposition and vice versa. In the last few months, the situation in Syria has acquired particular salience in international politics. In 2011, India, Brazil, and South Africa engaged with the Syrian authorities in dialogue on reform and political progress. Regrettably, the situation since has deteriorated, and today it has become fraught, and it is one in which guns rather than political parties are doing the talking. The continued stalemate must give way to a Syrian-led political process to bring about democratic change. The UN Security Council and the General Assembly both dealt with the crisis in Syria on a number of occasions during the last few months. We have supported every effort of the UN to play a mediating role and to operate a credible monitoring mission in that country. Support for these instrumentalities has been the basis for our differing votes. We have been supportive of regional initiatives to calm the situation and to provide good offices for advancing internal dialogue within Syria. The last theme which we are taking up is on India-UK strategic relations. India and the UK are declared strategic partners since 2004. We greatly value our relations with the UK and seek to strengthen and deepen our partnership in all areas. The India-UK strategic dialogue helps to strengthen our strategic partnership and will have its next round next week. It will examine various areas of strategic importance to both countries, including counterterrorism, cybersecurity, defense cooperation, nuclear disarmament, as also issues of regional and global nature. In a globalized and fast-changing world, cooperation in such areas between like-minded countries is of crucial importance. There is mutual interest in strengthening our relationship in these areas, and a number of mechanisms have been put in place for taking the strategic relationship forward. In the world after 9th of September in New York, July 2005 in London, and the 26th of November 2008 in Mumbai, there is greater awareness of the international contours of terrorism. A considerable amount of work is being done on counterterrorism through the Joint Working Group on Counterterrorism, which was set up in 2000. Much more can be done by our two countries, for instance, by establishing mechanisms for exchange of actionable intelligence in real time. Cybersecurity, to which I referred, has emerged as a major challenge. It requires close international cooperation to secure cyberspace, which is a borderless domain. India and the UK both have a common interest in ensuring a secure and resilient cyberspace, as we are both major players in this field. Both are members of the UN Group of Governmental Experts on International Information Security. There is an active ongoing dialogue between the national security councils of the two countries, and we are looking forward to starting a policy dialogue on bilateral cooperation in this field between the foreign offices in October this year. There are a large number of Indian IT companies based in the UK, which is an additional dimension in our cooperation. India had participated at ministerial level in the London Conference on Cyberspace organized by the government of UK last year, which reflects the importance we attach to this domain for multifaceted human development. On issues of disarmament, India's record and credentials need to be underlined, and we count on the continued support of the UK in ensuring India's full membership of the 4 multilateral export control regimes. Such support would be consistent with our strategic partnership, wherein our robust bilateral relationship reinforces the commonalities of our position on issues of global interest and concern. These commonalities do create space for working together in critical areas such as space, nuclear energy, and high technology for defense, sectors in which our collaboration with some other partners has indeed moved ahead in the past decade. I do believe that given the links between our technological institutions and our scientific communities, the scope for developing synergies could evolve in the decades to come. The UK remains an important defense partner for India, and we should look at building more strategic collaboration in the defense industry. It would therefore be appropriate to conclude that our strategic relations can indeed be built further. Going beyond the subjects usually classified as, quote, strategic, unquote, we can already see a very extensive, broad-based relationship. Our business and industry have established a basis of partnership on an equal footing with prospects for further growth. Along with our political dialogue, our technological exchanges, and defense collaborations, this provides a platform for building strategic ties. There are, of course, some obstacles in the short term. The policies intended to curb illegal immigration into the UK should not lead to the perception that there could be collateral damage in the fields of education and people-to-people relationships. Building up understanding of each other's priorities necessary for forging new strategic links requires a regular and continuing dialogue, which indeed requires travel facilitation. It also needs to be said that in India's approach, we take due regard of the UK's regional context and the state of its relations with other countries in this part of the world. And we do not find this limiting the scope for taking forward common interests. There is a larger sense, however, in which our strategic relations could be made to grow. India is part of the democratic world. It is in many ways a part of an English-speaking world, and we also share many of Europe's fundamental values: a respect for scientific attitudes and an understanding of the importance of a secular approach to issues in the domain of politics. That is to say, we share much in common in our vision for the world of tomorrow. If in addition to our own ideas, we build on these concepts, Indo-UK strategic relations could well have a beneficial impact well beyond the bilateral sphere. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Foreign Secretary, for kicking off so splendidly all the areas of today's dialogue and, as it were, setting a text for them. I'm going to open it up for questions and comments now. And the first question from my colleague, Rahul Roy Chaudhary.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much for focusing your remarks on the 3 dialogue sessions that we are going to have in the next few hours. I have 2 questions relating specifically to Afghanistan. You mentioned in your remarks that there is concern in Delhi over the emergence of a zero-sum game situation being played out in Afghanistan. There are observers who talk about the development of a zero-sum game situation between India and Pakistan in Afghanistan. These are the same people who feel that as NATO combat forces withdraw in the next 2 years, there could be an opportunity for proxy war between India and Pakistan in Afghanistan and over Afghanistan. What would you say to such criticism of policies from the region? That's the first question. The second question is really on another issue that you've touched upon, which is the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, the so-called peace pipeline. But is the peace pipeline, the TAPI project, really feasible in terms of the current environment, in terms of the difficulties that Afghanistan is going through and the region is going through as well, especially when there is no formal dialogue between India and Pakistan on Afghanistan? Thank you.
Well, I think I tried to address this issue in my remarks. In that there are three things. First, 2-3 issues one needs to look at. First, I think in the international conclaves which have taken place, it has become reasonably clear that the intention to continue support for Afghanistan through the international community would not come to an end in 2014, even if there is a security force drawdown, and that right in the entire decade ahead of us, we will continue to see support for stabilization and particularly economic support to Afghanistan. So we expect to see a continued presence of the international community in assisting Afghanistan as it transitions to a future in which it relies more on itself for its security. That said, we do realize that the agendas of different countries may be differing. And that is why we have posed and suggested regional cooperation, not limited to only 2 or 3 countries, but to entire regions, as one context in which to place the possibilities of a different way of looking at Afghanistan. And I think the 2 questions you have are in fact interlinked in a way. When we held the investment summit on Afghanistan in Delhi, we had participation from all regional countries, including Iran, Pakistan, China, Russia, United States, and Europe, apart from, of course, a very large turnout from the Indian business sector. So we would certainly hope that this vision of seeing Afghanistan as an opportunity rather than as a problem would be able to prevail. Now, specifically on the TAPI, I don't know if it is called the peace pipeline. It is called the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. We have certainly gone as far as getting a general sales agreement in place, which means that Pakistan sees it as an opportunity for obtaining much critically needed energy supplies from Turkmenistan. And I think all the countries in the group see India's participation in this as adding to the viability of the pipeline as a whole, particularly since we'll have to sell certain volumes of gas to make the entire pipeline successful. So far, we have got to the stage of even having road shows now to involve international business partners in it. It has done reasonably well, considering the kind of skepticism it faces, which you mentioned, and I think it has been making good progress. So it could be symbolic of something that is changing, and seeing Afghanistan's position in the subcontinent as a significant catalyst. I would also add that there are reports that Afghanistan itself may be home to a substantial hydrocarbon potential. And we do know that there are countries within the region and outside who have expressed interest in joining in exploration and production. There is great potential in the mineral sector, and if these are to be tapped successfully, they would require involvement of not just one or two countries, but many. So I think this is the basis on which we are proceeding. We do not discount the possibility that politics may overwhelm economics, but we are at a place today where, given the continued involvement of the international community, the changing nature of the perception of Afghanistan, and the possibility that some kind of more successful policies towards political transition would emerge in the 2014 period, all I think give the scope for looking at Afghanistan in a different way. And India certainly has never looked at Afghanistan as a zero-sum game or as a venue to carry out anything like a competition for influence with anybody else.
Thank you very much. The gentleman on the aisle there, about 5 rows back, and a bit further back. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bhupender Jasani from King's College London. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned about the nuclear issues. Now there is a lot of saber rattling going on vis-a-vis Iran, and I was wondering, suppose, and God help that nothing will happen, suppose something does happen in Iran, what would be the India's position? Because of, you mentioned about the terrorism, you mentioned about other problems that might occur, and unfortunately one of the consequences might be just that if there are any actions taken either overtly or covertly in Iran vis-a-vis its nuclear program, how would India react? Thank you.
Well, that's a hypothetical question, and diplomats are always extremely careful about not answering hypothetical questions. But let me just say that two things. One, on the Iranian nuclear question, we believe that the only way to find a durable solution is through diplomatic negotiations. And we give great importance to the P5+1 engagement with Iran and the attempt to find a practical, workable arrangement. The consequences of any other way of trying to deal with this problem would be very, very severe. Certainly, as I mentioned, our stakes in the Gulf region, particularly on the southern part of the Gulf, are enormous, and the potential worries about a conflict are very, very large. But as I said, this is, how one could react in a given situation is not something I can speculate on. All I can say is that we would earnestly hope and we would earnestly work together with others in the international community to prevent that kind of a situation from ever coming to pass.
Thank you. In the second row, Nick Redman.
Thank you, Minister. Another question on TAPI, and I suppose reluctantly I must be part of the gang of TAPI skeptics. Firstly, on the question of financing the pipeline, if you cannot find a banker who's courageous enough to agree to finance on acceptable terms, would India consider part financing construction or offering a state guarantee on part of the construction costs? And secondly, there are plenty of examples in the world of transit states who, very much like Pakistan, are really reliant on the fuel as a customer, but have nevertheless at times leveraged supply and their position as a transit state for broader trends. There are other examples, and I'm thinking particularly in Latin America, where energy projects have not gone on precisely because of the risk of transit. So could you say a little, please, about your view of potentially giving Pakistan extra leverage over India in a context where the general framework of relations is not the best?
Well, I'm not an expert on either the TAPI pipeline itself or on pipelines in general, but I would say that compared to just 2 years ago, I think the tone of the discussions has certainly become a little more practical and a little more forward-looking. That's the general impression we have in India. Financing, yes, it would be a problem. I'm not quite sure we have given attention to trying to finance it ourselves. But there would certainly, if as I said, the general sales agreement now proceeds and the road shows do succeed, there would certainly be, I think, banks in India which might be willing to join it. But as I said, this is not an issue on which I have really spent a lot of time studying the specifics. On the question of leveraging, well, certainly no country would finally sign on to an accord if there were the lingering worry that there aren't enough guarantees about the security of supply under all normal commercial circumstances. So this is a factor we'll have to take into account, obviously. I don't see that as a drawback just now.
Thank you. Gentleman in the second row there. Over there.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I must compliment you for a very exhaustive survey and telling about the Indian thinking on various subjects. I'm here in my capacity as the old and continuing member of IISS. Jal Malik is my name. It didn't come out in the talk, though my previous person did ask about the money. Same about Afghanistan. Once ISF leaves, it requires 4.1 billion per year to keep the Afghan army and the Afghan police going. Where will the money come from? And the second, General Lawrence Nicholson is supposed to have remarked that, well, we took the Afghan forces in the last 2010 offensive, but they are just barely put on the uniform. It's the week in August in the UK, the magazine covered it. And the assessment in February in US is that out of the 156 battalions of the Afghan army, only 13 can take on independent operations. And the last question, if I may, I'm glad that the Director General of IDSA, Arvind Gupta, is sitting here, and IISS is the right place to raise this question. Somehow the old strategic thought and the old diplomatic thought and conventions seem to be needing a review. I say this with reference to the dates that you gave of various attacks. One of the dates you mentioned was 7 July 2005. It just so happens that I was in Pakistan. There was an RCDS group invited by the president, and we were there, and it took place in the center of our visit. We went on 4th, we came back on 11th, it was on 7th. And there were Brit members there, and here was the president, in front of us, with us. It's very difficult to picture that every time we have a convenient suspect and we hang the thing, and we are done with. Because ideas don't die. This terrorism or this whatever has now happened in the world, it don't die. Otherwise, Barar wouldn't have been attacked on Sunday. So if this does not happen, our old conventions, systems, okay, we held a conference, we held a summit, decided everything will be fine. Where will the money come from? One does not know. How will these Afghan army battalions suddenly get strengthened when ISF moves? Or will we go back to the anarchy which was there earlier before ISF came? Thank you.
Well, that's a whole menu of speculations you want me to get into. So I'll rely on the answer I gave to the previous question. But let me just say that in terms of the support the Afghan economy and particularly to its budget, I think the Tokyo conference ended with a reasonably optimistic outlook for support up to 2024. It is recognized, of course, that the current size of the Afghan security forces would impose a very heavy cost to the Afghan exchequer. And in this context, I think the idea of a political dialogue and political transition does acquire importance. But I think the fact is that it is not as if the support from the international community is going to come to an end in 2014 or 2015. There has been a commitment to continue it for the whole decade thereafter. Of the number of battalions who are actually battle ready and so on, I mean, being a military man, you're in a better position to analyze the reports which have come out of Washington. All I can say is that the effort to continue to train the Afghan security forces is now a multinational commitment, and a very large number of countries have agreed to continue the training support. The advise and assist role will of course be that of only a few countries who will continue to have a presence there in Afghanistan. I think there's a strategic partnership agreement between the United States and Afghanistan also, which is meant not just for a year or two, but for a relatively long period. One analysis I saw, I happened to be in Kabul in August last year when the attack on Kabul took place. In the Serena Hotel was attacked, and there was an attack near the airport, and I was in the airport and spent 2 hours longer than I should have before I could go into the city. Subsequently, in discussions with officials who were involved with an attack which took place in February or March this year, there was another one, the analysis given and the impression gathered by a large number of international observers was that the capacity of the Afghan national security forces had in fact improved in its ability to take on the attackers. There were still clearly gaps in their ability to be forewarned that the attack was coming, which clearly points to an intelligence and an information gap which still needs to be filled. But the record of the forces at that time, this was in April of this year, according to many analysts similar to the ones you quoted to me, was that the performance was reasonably good. Now, as I said, I can't sort of speculate on how things will develop. All I can say is that there are trends and possibilities in both directions. The impression we have is that the possibilities of stabilization, the possibilities of the continued training, the possibilities of the continued support for the budget of Afghanistan do point us in the direction of a reasonably optimistic outcome. But there are many pitfalls, there are many dangers ahead, and clearly international support will continue to be necessary. On the last question you mentioned about terrorism, I think this simply underlines the need for a much greater international cooperation. We have been arguing in the UN for what is called the comprehensive CCIT, the Comprehensive Convention Against International Terrorism. There have been some developments in the manner of listing of individuals and organizations through that agency. But clearly, unless there is greater cooperation from countries where these groups are based, you're right, we will not be able to make a great deal of progress. But for this, we need to be constantly vigilant, we need to be prepared, we need to arm ourselves to be not taken unawares again. That is also part of the requirement for all of us, I think, as part of the international community.
Thank you. There are a number of people who want to intervene. So what I propose to do is to take them in small groups, Foreign Secretary, if that's okay. So we'll begin with the gentleman on the aisle here on the third row. Yeah.
Deepak Lalwani. Welcome back to London, Foreign Secretary. You mentioned about energy security. Energy is so important for India's economy to grow. My question is, China and India are competing, especially in Africa, for assets. Could this change to cooperation, given the deeper pockets of China, or is that not possible?
Thank you. And then in the front row here.
Thank you. Ashish Ray of the Times of India. I noticed that in your remarks, Foreign Secretary, you avoided mention of Pakistan and China. Perhaps this reflects India's increasingly more broad-based outlook on the world. But if I may concentrate on these two a little bit. India has been holding dialogue with Pakistan at various levels in recent times. Most recently, a visit by India's External Affairs Minister to Islamabad. There appears to be a difference of tone between the two countries in the assessment of the state of relations. Pakistan seems to be more enthusiastic. India sounds more subdued. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on your views on the state of relations and whether it is imminent that the Indian Prime Minister will be visiting Pakistan soon? The second point, of course, is the dialogue on the territorial dispute between India and China. Where do things lie on this?
Thank you. And one more question in this round. The lady towards the back. There's a lady who wanted, yeah.
Thank you. I'm Sanu Chai, I'm a PhD student at King's College London. My question to Foreign Secretary is, I would like to draw your attention to the legal issues in India specifically. India has recently announced the opening of foreign direct investment in its nuclear energy sector. But how do you see the Indian nuclear sector growth given the situation of nuclear regulatory mechanism within India, and especially the difficulties that foreign companies are facing with regards to India's nuclear liability law?
Thank you. Do you want to have a go at this?
Energy cooperation. Well, you're absolutely right. Energy is absolutely crucial to how India develops. China and India, well, yes. I mean, some years ago, I think we had a minister for petroleum and natural gas who specifically brought up the prospect of India and China cooperating. I think the actual, cooperation in the field of energy, and particularly the search for resources, is one of those which exemplify what is called the case-by-case approach. There is no generalized possibility. We are both partners, in a sense, in the search for, say, a solution to the differences between South Sudan and Sudan, because we are both large-scale investors in South Sudan and in Sudan. And the stoppage of oil flow out of South Sudan through the pipelines heading through Sudan to the coast caused a serious problem for both China and India. So yes, to that extent, you're right. But I think around the rest of the world, we have our companies, they have theirs. They compete, and I think that situation will continue. I think this is a matter of commercial competition and getting the right kind of conditions in which your companies can do well. I have frankly not seen many cases where we have tried to work together with the Chinese to bid and so on. That simply doesn't happen in this world. The rules under which all countries operate require competitive bidding. There are cases of domination, but those are relatively few and far between, because every country is trying to maximize the gains from its own resources. There are, as I said, possibilities for our working together in cases like in Sudan. We have also, of late, been looking at other parts of the world, including in Latin America, and certainly in the search for oil and gas, we will continue our outward-looking approach. I'm not so sure that in each case we can build the possibility of working together with China. But I think what we can ensure is, I think that the world has enough to deal with our requirements and theirs, and we should be able to talk about it in a rational way. Pakistan and China. Well, yes, I think the fact that I spoke relatively little about them does reflect the truth that Indian foreign policy is now preoccupied with an extraordinarily large number of issues at the global level as well as the regional level. I was in Pakistan myself a few weeks ago with the External Affairs Minister for the dialogue. Just to place the dialogue between our two countries in context, you're aware that after November 2008, the dialogue process came to a halt and it was resumed only in 2010. In 2011, we both agreed to restart dialogue on almost all the issues which had been put onto the agenda of the bilateral relationship earlier. And it was agreed that we would complete a round of dialogues over a period of a year and then meet again, which is what took my External Affairs Minister to Pakistan. I think if you look at the record of the dialogues, we have made some progress in the areas of trade and people-to-people relations. But we have not really been able to make a great deal of progress on the other dossiers. To this extent, I think you're right. We take a subdued, you might call it, I think we call it practical approach, and say that we need to work on a step-by-step basis as we build our relationship. It is absolutely clear that unless there is action taken by Pakistan to bring to justice those responsible for the attack on Mumbai, the kind of support you need to build a different relationship with Pakistan would not be forthcoming. That said, we are keen to build the relationship with Pakistan, to normalize it so that it in fact becomes a matter of stability in the subcontinent and gives us the ability to concentrate on the more urgent task, as I said, of national transformation. I don't know if it would be right to characterize, if one looks at the different subjects we brought up, say, in the joint communique, there are issues on which we were enthusiastic and they were subdued, and there were issues on which they were enthusiastic and we might have been subdued. So it depends on which perspective you use. The Prime Minister has said that he looks forward to visiting Pakistan, but would like a substantial outcome and would like the groundwork to be extensive and completed. So that is where we stand on that. In regard to China, the dialogue between our two countries on the territorial dispute is an ongoing one. I would say that we have not made a great deal of progress in actually resolving the dispute, but one matter of some satisfaction, I think, is that we have been able to ensure that there is a degree of peace and tranquility on the border, and both countries have reaffirmed that that is the pressing immediate requirement, even as the dialogue continues. And we have set up a mechanism between the two foreign ministries to constantly monitor and report on the border issues and to ensure that the two governments stay in very close touch to maintain that peace and tranquility. This was proposed during Prime Minister Wen Jiabao's visit in December 2010. It was set up late last year and it has now met, and it is, I think, reasonably effective.
Thank you. I'd like to just get a couple...
Sorry, there was one on the nuclear issue. Well, I think, I don't know if it's right to characterize it as foreign direct investment. We have had agreements with 3 countries on specifically on involving foreign companies in the foreign partners in the civil nuclear energy in India. Incidentally, our nuclear energy program continues to have a very large priority to our own domestic development. We are at the stage now of scaling up the size of our reactors to a 700 megawatt reactor, and that is a program which will go ahead irrespective of what happens in our dialogue with foreign partners. But with the Russians, we have in fact now, as you are all aware of, Kudankulam 1 and 2. This is about to go on stream, and we are discussing 3 and 4. With the French, the discussions between Areva and NPCIL are still going on. There's still a number of technical and financial issues which remain to be resolved, but that dialogue is ongoing. The issue of liability has come up particularly in the context of our discussion with the US. I would say that in the month of February, we organized a rather extensive and detailed dialogue between the companies and their legal experts and some legal experts on the Indian side to clarify what the liability law and even more so the regulations under the law would mean. And we feel that dialogue has helped clarify issues to the point where at least one of the US companies believes that it can now start thinking in terms of their project in India more from an accounting point of view rather than a legal point of view. So I think there are prospects that we should be able to make some progress there.
Thank you. I'm just going to run over time just a little bit, encroach into the coffee break if I could, because there are quite a few people who still would like to intervene, and I'd like to just satisfy some of them. I'm afraid, I apologize in advance, I will not be able to satisfy everybody. But the gentleman right at the back, please.
Thank you. My name is Vinod Kumar.
Could you stand up, please, so we can see?
Vinod Kumar, member of this institute. Can we go back to the conflict in Afghanistan for a moment, Mr. Foreign Secretary? You said that cooperation was essential to resolving the conflict. Now, as you very well know, the cooperation in the subcontinent has been impeded seriously by the continuing tensions between India and Pakistan. Now, you said the dialogue is going on, but it seems to be meandering. Well, given that, what prospect do you hold forth for resolution of the conflict in Afghanistan in the next couple of years and beyond 2014? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then the gentleman in the second row here, right here, please. Yeah, the microphone is coming. Yes.
Thank you very much. I was going to ask a question, I am going to ask a question about Japan, because so far the excellent speech by the Foreign Secretary referred to a number of other countries, but Japan still happens to be a fairly large Asian country, and it was not mentioned by the speaker at all. And I think it's justified to ask what, and I apologize for my voice having gone, justified to ask what India's relations with Japan are, considering in particular that Japan, apart from still being extremely powerful economically, is also rearming.
Thank you. Afghanistan and Japan.
Well, since I was told my talk was on the record, I didn't indulge in my usual rather poorly selected humor. But let me just say that when I mentioned international cooperation, there's about Afghanistan and the need for us now to work together on dealing with the threats which lie ahead. And let me be absolutely clear, there is a real danger ahead if the situation is allowed to develop in the direction of what happened in the 1990s. Of that, there should be no doubt. When I talk of international cooperation, I'm talking about the kind of situation in which now there are a larger number of countries who see the dangers emerging from safe havens, who see the dangers of leaving Kabul to its own devices, and at least making an effort to work together to see that something stabilizes there. There will be need for a political dialogue, and the opponents of the regime will have to be drawn into that dialogue. That's quite clear. But it has to be done on the basis of certain red lines. And there's a joke I've cracked already twice, and if there are members of this audience who have heard me on these two occasions, you'll forgive me for repeating it. And this was supposed to have been an ad or something for Nike shoes. And there were these two gentlemen in the middle of a jungle who suddenly come across a dangerous man-eating tiger who growls very loudly at them. So think of that man-eating tiger as the threats you face. And then one chap quickly opens his bag and takes out his Nike or whatever shoes he was going to wear. And the other man turns around to him and says, "Do you really think you can outrun the tiger?" And he says, "No, sir, I only have to outrun you." Now that's not the approach which is going to help any of us. So let me just conclude it there. Turning to Japan, I thank you, and I apologize in advance for not having referred to a large number of countries who are absolutely critical partners with us. We have a special dialogue with both Brazil and South Africa, which is now taking a three-continent kind of collaboration and taking that forward. We work together in BRICS. So there are a large number of areas in which India has relationships which are absolutely critical to our foreign policy, which I didn't touch on. It wasn't intended as a tour d'horizon. But let me say Japan certainly is one absolutely vital partner of India, and it is going to loom even larger in our foreign policy in the years ahead. We have so far been focusing attention on Japan's possible role in the development of Indian infrastructure and as a much larger investor in India. We are working together on what is called the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor and a special freight element in it to support through railway lines coming down from Delhi to Mumbai. That's a huge project. The Japanese government and its agencies have committed as much as $4 billion to it, and our government has also committed an equal amount. Once that project starts, it will lead to the development of townships all the way along this freight corridor from Delhi down to the coast in Mumbai. It could be a real game changer. Now that there are problems of investment in other parts of Asia, I think the Japanese are taking a very hard look at India as a real opportunity. We have also expanded our defense dialogue with Japan. We are having regular contacts between our navies. We have exercises together. Our defense minister and the Japanese defense minister have an annual meeting. And certainly I think this is one relationship which is set to grow. The Japanese also have some interesting technology in seaplanes and things like this, which might be of relevance to India in the future. But this is set to grow. We are also just started at an official level a dialogue between Japan, the United States and India on working together in different fields of mutual interest. So I think this relationship is really one which will flourish in the years to come. The fact that Japan is a democracy, that it is interested in peace and stability in East Asia, it means that in the East Asia Summit context also, we are going to be partners.
Well, thank you very much. Regrettably, we have not managed to outrun time. It has caught up with us, so I apologize to all the other people who wanted to speak. We must break now because we have further sessions. If you're staying for the next session, could I ask you in any case to vacate the room because it must be reorganized a little bit, and there's coffee and tea just behind the room. But meanwhile, I really would like to thank the Foreign Secretary for answering all your questions in a masterly way and for kicking off this dialogue, and we look forward to the first sessions later on today. Thank you very much indeed.